This is the story of Dr. Kermit Gosnell, who was sentenced to life in prison for 2 botched abortions that resulted in the death of 2 patients and the mutilation of 3 late-term babies who were born alive and murdered after he and other unlicensed clinical aides stabbed and snipped the spinal cords to, as he put it, ensure fetal demise. There were more, but they were the only ones for which evidence could be presented. Most of you have heard about him through documentaries or reading court dockets. This video isn't intended to replicate what's already out there. Rather, it is to delve into the cultural motives stemming from that which was culturally bequeathed through the Eugenics movement that spanned from 1907 to 1939. When most people think of eugenics, they negate the cultural absorption of those values into black society and focus on key white players such as Margaret Sanger and Charles Davenport, all the while forgetting key thought leaders such as William Burkhart Dubois and Dr. John A. Kenney, and the myriad of people who participated actively in attempting to pair to produce a better race genetically. Many of the generations born between 1907 and 1939 were the products of that ideology, which resulted in enhanced colorism and classism, all within the confines of Jim Crow black society. It certainly didn't start that way, but many of the thought leaders felt that eugenics could be used to fight against racism by improving the quality of the race and eliminating what they called racial decay and contamination. Instead, it was not only weaponized against them by white society, but it became weaponized within the race as well. The philosophies of Dr. Kermit Gosnell, as well as his actions, reflect the musings of eugenics. Gosnell was born on February 9, 1941. He came from a middle-class family and became a family practice physician. Yet, his path of community service, opening facilities for troubled teens, drug rehabilitation, and in 1979, an abortion clinic, seems reflective of what would have been referred to at that time as a race man. A race man is someone who works to improve the lives of his community and challenges the things that threaten it. During an interview, Gosnell shared a quote and a poem that reflects a eugenicist undertone. In the first quote, Gosnell states, "George Bernard Shaw said, 'Practical man changes to live within his society. Impractical man has the priority of changing society to meet his own needs. Therefore, society can only change through impractical man.'" When asked if he described himself as an impractical man, his response was no question. George Bernard Shaw was an Irish playwright who was an outspoken promoter of eugenics. The poem that he shared went as such: "Abortion providers are labelled killers, exploitive, horrendous, barbaric and inhumane, not physicians oathed to heal. Lest we forget what chance have those infants, those without the support of their parents, of their families, of their communities and their societies. So many of those, without sufficient support, stumble into drugs, crime, mental illness institutions and languish in their jails." Take note when he says their jails. He's not talking about the jails of the subject, but probably those of greater white society. Kermit Gosnell's beliefs reflect the core tenets of Dr. John A. Kenney, who stated in his essay, "The eugenic baby can only come through the correct parentage. Those interested are forced to consider ways and means of purifying the present contaminated race of mortals in order to fit them of the duties before them. In other words, to remove what Dubois calls the criminal class so that the best of the race could make progress." Dubois stated that the best of the race were to be educated to guide the masses away from the contamination and death of the worst of their own race and others. These were the core tenets of the talented 10th ideology. Although very difficult to believe, Dr. Kermit Gosnell was considered one of the best of the race, and he felt as if he was purifying the present contaminated race, the drug addicts, criminals, feeble-minded, etc., to make way for the others who could pull the race forward. This is the legacy left behind from the eugenics movement that spread into a segregated society with far-reaching repercussions. Today, the remnants of the ideology can be seen through professional athletes and black-identified people, men seeking to create better black women through interracial relationships. It's felt through the black women who believe in selective abortion of black males and the classism of the educated elite, weaponized against other blacks based on looks or degree status. Kermit Gosnell is no worse than the above mentioned. He was a product of the defective cultural legacy left behind by the previous generation of thought leaders. To be very honest, I don't know what to think about the likes of Gosnell, Dubois or Kenney. I know that I've heard and felt trickles of the ideology from adults when I was a child. whether it was the educators, neighbours, or other thought leaders. Yes, there is an innately bad element that does nothing but make it difficult for those of us attempting to live a normal life. They function as ambassadors who create a rocky path and reception wherever you go, because people become conditioned to the expectation that you're also going to be a criminal, incompetent, lazy, promiscuous, or intellectually dull. They make it very difficult to exist. Unfortunately, the true boule class no longer has any power to hide them or silence them, since C. Dolores Tucker lost the fight with record executives over gangster rap. Since that time, the free market has exploited and profited from the class of people who were at one time viewed as contaminants of the race. Recently, the veil was lifted from the faces of various celebrities whose degeneracy was hidden from view by wealth. Class isn't determined by money or looks, as we see with people like Sean Diddy Combs, or what we hear when someone like Beyoncé speaks. Yet many of these people have been elevated to positions of power, and they excuse the actions and behaviours of these quote-unquote bad ambassadors by blaming poverty or various other systems. As a result, our enemy list has broadened to include other ethnic groups from around the world, sometimes from the same race, as this class of people become more visible and travel abroad, sullying the path for other Black Americans. It's one of the reasons why the educated elite are so passionate about abortion and colour it as a Black woman's issue. Many of these people live in gated communities, and although they're willing to turn a blind eye to criminality, their goal is to stop the contaminants from reproducing, and in the meantime, replacing them with people who have slightly better values through mass immigration. Gosnell is not the first, nor will he be the last. Unfortunately, the definition of a contaminant is subjective, because whereas someone may view you and yours as good people, others may not. All of us can easily be stamped as one of them. I just pray that a meeting of the impractical minds never occur in this country, as it did in Germany, with the target for elimination being someone like me thrown in with those deemed as deplorable.